Marlon Brando purchased a private island in 1967 and prohibited nearly everyone from going there. We now understand why. Following his passing, they discovered enigmatic shipwrecks and old ruins. Hundreds of covert recordings in which he made admissions he never shared with anybody. The most startling finding, though? He came up with the strange regulations that still govern the island today. This isn't your average celebrity retreat. There are secrets there that are so outrageous you won't think they're true. On April 3, 1924, Marlon Brando was born in Omaha, Nebraska. His early years were chaotic. Marlon Brando Sr., his father, was a traveling salesman who was never at home. He was aloof and chilly when he was. He frequently referred to his kid as sluggish and dumb, which Brando remembered for years. Dorothy, his mother, was unique. She was vivacious, imaginative, and kind. However, she battled drinking. She would be gone for days, abandoning her kids. She occasionally needed to be escorted home from clubs since she was too inebriated to do so alone. Brando's parents divorced when he was 11 years old. He and his sisters relocated to California with their mother. They moved to Libertyville, Illinois, after reconciling 2 years later. However, very nothing changed. His father remained unforgiving. His mother remained untrustworthy. The only way Brando knew how to get out was this. He amused himself by imitating others, playing tricks, and assuming various accents and personas. It was only a method to kill time, but it would soon develop into something much more. He was never interested in school. It was exacerbated by his connection with his father. Whatever he accomplished, it was never sufficient. It seemed hard to get his father's favor. Brando felt compelled to defend his mother at the same time. He frequently intervened when his father yelled at her. This influenced how he saw authority. He believed that regulations should be questioned rather than obeyed. He was expelled from Libertyville High School for such attitude. He rode a motorbike through the corridors, according to others. His dad had had enough. He sent Brando to Minnesota's Shattuck Military Academy in 1939. Strict punishment, which he believed would transform him, instead increased Brando's disobedience. He gained notoriety for playing practical jokes. He once took the school bell tower's clapper and buried it 200 yards away. Where it had disappeared to was unknown to the school. In spite of everything, Brando discovered something genuine in one location. He found a feeling of purpose in the school's theatrical program. He learned that acting was more than simply a means of entertainment under the tutelage of drama instructor Earl Duke Wagner. Although it was a means of communicating something more profound, it was insufficient to keep him out of trouble. He was expelled in 1943 for violating too many probationary rules. A petition to bring him back was signed by students. Brando, however, didn't wait to find out. He went out. He chose to travel to New York City by train rather than go back home. He enrolled in the theatrical workshop and moved in with his sister, Jocelyn. He got to know Stella Adler there. She taught him to utilize his imagination rather than merely his own experiences by introducing him to method acting. She urged him to read, listen to music, and experiment with other concepts. Brando took in what she taught him. He wanted to do more than simply perform. His goal was to alter the perception of acting. When Marlon Brando performed as Stanley Kowalski in a movie called Desire at the Ethel Barrymore Theater in New York City on December 3, 1947, his career took off. Despite just being 24 years old, his performance was unprecedented by the audience. Brando made Tennessee Williams's play, which was already a huge hit, memorable. Director Elia Kazan and Williams noticed something distinct in Brando, even though the character of Stanley was initially created for an older man. He offered something fresh rather than portraying Stanley as merely a thug. His aggression and rage didn't feel practiced, they felt genuine. It was impossible to deny his bodily presence. He didn't only play the role. He turned into it. Brando studied real-life boxer Rocky Graziano in a boxing gym to be ready for the part. He imitated his stance, his speech patterns, and his manner of movement. Later, Graziano was startled to see a streetcar. After the curtain was raised, the jerk from the gym appeared on stage and began to play me. Brando gave an incredible performance. Stella, the way he yelled, the way he spoke, the way he danced, become renowned in their desperation. He was dubbed a game changer by critics. The play closed in 1949 after 855 performances. Although Jessica Tandy's portrayal of Blanche DuBois earned her a Tony Award, Brando emerged as the production's spokesperson. Hollywood was observing. The Men, which was directed by Fred Zinnemann, was Brando's first motion picture. He portrayed combat veteran Ken Willichik, who tries to adapt to his new life after becoming crippled. Brando inhabited the part rather than merely portraying it. He studied injured soldiers for weeks while confined to a wheelchair. He desired to comprehend their suffering, annoyances, and day-to-day challenges. The movie was among the first in Hollywood to concentrate on injured troops who were returning from combat. It was said that Brando's performance was quite emotive and real. At the time, he wasn't acting like a movie star. He was acting in a new way. He introduced Stanley Kowalski to the big screen in the 1951 Elia Kazan-directed film adaptation of A Streetcar Named Desire. On TV, his performance was much more impactful than it had been on stage. The movie received 12 nominations for Academy Awards and took home 4 of them, including Best Actress for Vivien Leigh. Brando was nominated for Best Actor for the first time. Even though he lost, his influence was indisputable. He was an actor like no one Hollywood had ever seen. In 1952, he followed this triumph with Viva Zapata. He received another Oscar nomination for his portrayal in Emiliano Zapata, the Mexican rebel. He studied the people, their speech patterns, and their way of life in Zapata's hometown in order to get ready. He played Mark Antony in Shakespeare and Julius Caesar in 1953. His performance dispelled many people's doubts about his ability to manage the traditional dialogue. Then followed On the Waterfront in 1954, which was hailed by critics as one of the greatest depictions of Antony on film. The movie that turned Brando into a legend was this one. He portrayed Terry Malloy, a dock worker torn between his morals and dishonest union executives. His performance was unvarnished, filled with remorse and suffering. One of the most often cited lines in film history is his well-known statement, "I could have been a contender." Among the 8 Academy Awards the movie took home was Best Picture. Brando won Best Actor this time. He was more than simply a Hollywood star by the middle of the 1950s. He was his generation's most significant actor. Acting was permanently altered by Brando. Marlon Brando was already well known by 1953, but the Wild One elevated him to a higher level. He became a cultural icon as a result. A real-life incident in 1947 when motorcycle gangs wreaked mayhem in Hollister, California, served as the basis for the movie. Brando portrayed the Black Rebels Motorcycle Club's commander, Johnny Strabler, in the film. He looked effortlessly stylish wearing a leather jacket with a tilted hat. His acting didn't feel fake, it felt genuine. "What are you rebelling against?" a female in the movie questioned. "And what do you have?" he replied. It became a generation's voice. Because authorities believed the movie fostered adolescent revolt, it was banned in Britain until 1968. Even a spike in adolescent delinquency has been attributed to it by sociologists. The impact of Brando extended much beyond the screen. Elvis Presley's leather-clad look and James Dean's role in Rebel Without a Cause were both strongly influenced by him. The culture of bikers themselves evolved as well. Following the movie, Brando's victorious Thunderbird motorbike came to represent liberty. He was not only portraying a rebel, rather, he was establishing a new benchmark for what insurrection should look like. However, Brando never allowed himself to be limited to a single character. He stunned audiences in 1955 when he starred in the musical Guys and Dolls. He co-starred with Frank Sinatra as the endearing gambler Sky Masterson. Brando's singing was unexpected, but he did it brilliantly. Despite its flaws, his rendition of Luck Be a Lady has elegance. It demonstrated that he was more than simply intense and moody. He was a comic. He may be amusing. He could be erratic. He tackled something very different with Sayonara, 1957, 2 years later. In the movie, a Japanese dancer during the Korean War captures the heart of an American Air Force commander. Even though interracial romances were still considered taboo in Hollywood in the 1950s, Brando didn't back down. His emotive and controlled performance depicted a man torn between duty and love. The movie made $26.3 million at the box office, making it a huge smash. It received 4 Academy Awards, including Best Supporting Actress for Miyoshi Yumiki, out of 9 nominations. She was the first woman from East Asia to win an Oscar. Brando was more than simply a movie star. He was saying things. His range was demonstrated by these performances. He was a rebel, a romantic lead, and even a vocalist, but his intense acting style also made him challenging to deal with. His uncooperative reputation was beginning to eclipse his skill by the early 1960s. The Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962 was the pinnacle of that notoriety. The film was intended to be a remake of the 1935 classic and a great Hollywood epic. Rather, it turned into one of the most disorganized filmmaking endeavors ever. Brando was at odds with almost everyone. Sir Carol Reed, the initial director, resigned due to ongoing conflicts with Brando and the company. Louis Milestone, his replacement, had no authority over him. In addition to demanding screenplay changes and refusing to recite lines he didn't like, Brando frequently arrived late. At times, he would simply stand still in front of the camera. Things got out of hand with the production. The budget skyrocketed to more than $19 million, which was startling at the time. MGM was on the verge of bankruptcy. Co-stars of Brando were incensed. He was described as a nightmare to deal with by Richard Harris. Tired with the never-ending delays, Milestone called the movie the Mutiny of Marlon Brando. The film had magnificent set designs and breathtaking cinematography when it was eventually released. Critics, however, were unimpressed. The 1935 original was regarded by many as superior. Audiences were perplexed by Brando's portrayal of Fletcher Christian. He portrayed him as soft-spoken and slightly haughty rather than a powerful hero. Although it was a daring decision, it didn't turn out the way he had intended. The Bounty Mutiny marked a sea change. Although Brando remained one of Hollywood's most gifted performers, the studios were growing impatient. He was now a problem because of his rebellious nature, which had formerly made him interesting. Marlon Brando had lost his former status as a box office star by the 1960s. His Hollywood image was eroding, and his career had taken a severe turn for the worst. He directed and acted in the 1961 movie One-Eyed Jacks, which marked the beginning of it. Despite only earning $4.3 million at the box office, the project exceeded its budget by $6 million. Brando became furious when Paramount Pictures finally took over the editing process. Later, the movie became well known, and in 2018 it was added to the National Film Registry. However, it was a flop for Brando. He never again directed a motion picture. His acting career also had difficulties. The 1960 film The Fugitive Kind, which was based on a Tennessee Williams play, fell short of expectations. Although he demonstrated his skill with The Ugly American, 1963, Bedtime Story, 1964, Morituri, 1965, and The Appaloosa, 1966, none of them were commercial hits. Even if 1967's Reflections in a Golden Eye had considerable artistic value, it wasn't enough to change his career. Brando made the decision to completely give from acting by 1968. His 3-year hiatus was an obvious indication that he had lost interest in Hollywood. His attention began to turn toward activism during this period. Although he had always been vocal, his involvement in civil rights activism increased. He participated in the 1963 March on Washington, backed groups like the Black Panthers, and backed Martin Luther King Jr. Brando remained remembered even after he left Hollywood. He was given the opportunity to revitalize his career with The Godfather in the early 1970s. However, it was difficult to obtain even that opportunity. He was not wanted by Paramount Pictures. He was viewed by the studio as untrustworthy and too dangerous to cast. The film's director, Francis Ford Coppola, pushed for Brando to play Don Vito Corleone. In the end, the studio consented, but only under very specific guidelines. Brando had to undergo a screen test, accept a wage reduction, and submit a financial surety in the event of misbehavior. Brando's screen test went down in history. To create the persona, he altered his voice, put cotton balls in his cheeks, and darkened his hair. Executives at the top were taken aback. They were forced to hand the part to him. After filming started, Brando worked in his own special manner. He relied on cue cards that were positioned around the show rather than memorizing lines. For Brando to read, Robert Duvall, who portrayed Tom Hagen, even had lines taped to his breast. This strategy could have been difficult for other performers, but it worked for Brando. His performance captivated the audience. The Godfather immediately became a classic after its 1972 debut. Brando's depiction of Don Corleone was hailed by critics and viewers alike as one of the best in movie history. Brando took home Best Actor at the 1973 Academy Awards. However, he chose to make history in a new way rather than accept it. He dispatched Sachin Littlefeather to decline the Oscar on his behalf, and he abstained from the event. The crowd was taken aback. While some cheered, others jeered. John Wayne allegedly needed to be prevented from violently assaulting Littlefeather backstage. Native American presence in Hollywood gained attention as a result of Brando's objection. However, it also strengthened his image as a troublemaker. Reports that questioned Littlefeather's Native American ancestry surfaced years later, sparking controversy. However, Brando's stand is still regarded as one of the most well-known incidents in Oscar history. His career, meantime, was completely revitalized. Once more, he was regarded as one of Hollywood's most prestigious performers. Later that year, Bernardo Bertolucci's film Last Tango in Paris marked Brando's next daring move. Paul, played by Brando, and a young woman, played by Maria Schneider, had a passionate, nameless relationship. Because of its graphic material, the movie was contentious from the beginning. However, one scene gained notoriety. In a fictitious physical encounter, Brando's character used butter as lubrication in an unplanned moment. Schneider then disclosed that she was not made aware of this information prior to shooting. She claimed to feel helpless and ashamed. In order to get a more genuine response, Bertolucci acknowledged that he and Brando had planned it without notifying her. Particularly in subsequent years during the Me Too movement, when individuals re-examined questions of consent in filmmaking, this discovery generated fury. Last Tango in Paris was a triumph in spite of the controversies. Despite not winning, it garnered Brando another Academy Award nomination. He had demonstrated in The Godfather and Last Tango in Paris that he was still capable of controlling the screen despite years of failure. However, Brando was unpredictable. Marlon Brando had been out of the public eye for years by the late 1970s. When he returned, he did it in a way that only he could, despite the fact that many thought his career was over. He played the part of Jor-El in Superman in 1978. Despite spending less than 20 minutes on TV, he received an incredible $3.7 million up front. He also obtained 11.75% of the movie's profits, which increased his overall compensation to over $19 million. For such a little role, no actor has ever received such a high salary. Unpredictable by nature, Brando refused to commit his lines to memory. He had them shown off-camera instead. He even went so far as to say that Kryptonians ought to resemble luminous bagels. That notion was promptly disregarded by the studio. His unique demands notwithstanding, his performance added something unique. Jor-El seemed authentic because of the gentle knowledge he conveyed through his voice, demeanor, and mannerisms. Superman went on to earn nearly $300 million globally, demonstrating that Brando could still influence a movie's popularity even in a little part. He played a considerably darker part in Apocalypse Now the following year. He portrayed Colonel Walter Kurtz, a rebellious U.S. Army soldier who was holed up in the jungle of Cambodia. It was already a fiasco of a production. It had setbacks, bad weather, and unforeseen medical emergencies, such as the heart attack of actor Martin Sheen. Things became even more complex when Brando showed up on scene. He was unprepared, overweight, and had not read the novel that served as the basis for the movie, Heart of Darkness. Kurtz's persona had to be immediately rewritten by filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola. Brando gave an unforgettable performance in spite of the mayhem. He gave Kurtz an air of mystery, which made him both interesting and dangerous. Despite working for only 3 weeks, he received $3 million. In the end, the movie made between $104.8 million and $150 million globally. It rose to prominence as one of the most acclaimed war movies ever made. Brando had a different type of part in Don Juan DeMarco, 1995, years later. He portrayed Dr. Jack Mickler, a psychiatrist who treated a young guy who thought he was the renowned Don Juan, and was portrayed by Johnny Depp. With a lighter tone, the movie blended romance and humor with more profound themes of identity and love. On-screen chemistry between Brando and Depp was great, and the movie was a modest hit, grossing $68 million worldwide. Brando was commended by critics for giving his portrayal a sense of comedy and warmth. His last significant performance was in the 2001 film The Score. In a criminal thriller about a last robbery, he co-starred with Edward Norton and Robert De Niro. Max, portrayed by Brando, is a criminal leader who persuades De Niro's character to accept the position. Although his acting gave the movie an air of authority, things weren't always easy behind the scenes. Brando refused to follow director Frank Oz's instructions and had a falling out with him. Despite the stress on set, he insisted on speaking via De Niro instead. The Score received accolades for its talented ensemble and brought in $113 million globally. Like his on-screen personas, Marlon Brando's real life was tumultuous. He had 3 marriages, but none of them lasted. Anna Cashby, his first wife, was a Welsh and Indian actress. They had a kid called Christian after being married in 1957, but their marriage was tainted by disputes and allegations. Due to Cashby's drug addiction issues, a contentious custody dispute arose after their marriage ended in 1959. Christian was once abducted by Cashby and taken to a hippie commune in Baja, Mexico. After 12 years of custody battles, Brando eventually gained full rights when Christian was 13 years old. The harm was done by then. Later, Brando acknowledged that his kid had developed emotional instability. In 1960, his second marriage to actress Movita Castaneda was as tumultuous. Their relationship was tense since she was 13 years older than he was. To prevent Brando from overindulging in food, Castaneda once shut the refrigerator in their house. All he did was eat the lock. When Brando learned it wasn't legal, their marriage terminated in 1968. Despite having previously been married, Castaneda never formally divorced her first husband. Brando fell in love with his Bounty co-star Tetiaroa while they were still legally married. He was 38 and she was a 19-year-old Tahitian actress. Simon and Cheyenne are their 2 children from their 1962 marriage. However, this marriage ended in sadness, much like his other marriages. Tetiaroa finally broke up with Brando in 1972 as a result of his infidelity. Through their kids, she maintained a connection to him even after they parted ways. Beyond his marriages, Brando had a rich romantic life. He had relationships with Rita Moreno and Marilyn Monroe, 2 of Hollywood's most well-known figures. In addition, he fathered at least 11 children with other women, including 3 with Cristina Maria Ruiz, his longtime housekeeper and mistress. Although he had passionate love connections, they frequently ended in regret and betrayal. Brando had an affair with Rita Moreno for 8 years, which was one of the most passionate and destructive relationships of his life. She was 22 and he was 30 when they first met on the Desiree set in 1954. Although she was attracted to him right away, their relationship was characterized by emotional manipulation. She continued returning even after Brando had cheated on her several times and fathered children with other women. Later on, she acknowledged that she developed an addiction to the cycle of getting him back. Moreno briefly dated Elvis Presley in an attempt to arouse Brando's jealousy, but she thought him was dull in comparison to Brando. Her pregnancy with Brando's kid was the actual tipping moment. He set up an illegal abortion, but she had to be admitted to the hospital after the procedure went awry. Brando responded angrily rather than in her favor. Moreno, who was emotionally spent and heartbroken, tried to kill herself in his house by ingesting a bottle of sleeping pills. It wasn't about retaliation, she subsequently said. All she wanted was for the suffering to stop. Although they had a professional reunion the next day in 1968, their relationship terminated shortly after. In a moment during production, Moreno smacked Brando, releasing years of pent-up anger. In retrospect, she claimed, Brando was her greatest passion, but their connection almost ended her life. Brando's romantic life wasn't the end of his emotional problems. Tragedies that befell his family would follow him for the rest of his life. His half-sister Cheyenne's lover, Dag Drole, was shot and murdered by his son Christian on May 16, 1990. It took place in Brando's Mulholland Drive home. Christian stated that he was standing up for Cheyenne, who had informed him that Drolet was mistreating her. However, before Christian fired, there was no sign of a scuffle. Brando was heartbroken. He sobbed in court as he acknowledged his shortcomings as a father. Christian was given a 10-year jail term after entering a guilty plea to voluntary manslaughter. He was discharged after just 5 years of service. Cheyenne's recovery from the trauma was never complete. She had battled mental health problems for years, but she experienced a severe depressive episode following Drolet's passing. When she was deemed mentally incompetent, she lost custody of her son, Tuki. She committed herself by hanging herself in her mother's Tahiti home on April 16, 1995. She was just 25. Brando couldn't go to her burial because he was too devastated. At the age of 80, Marlon Brando passed away on July 1, 2004. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, an uncommon lung condition that worsens over time, was the cause of respiratory failure. At 6:30 p.m., he died at UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles, capping a life full of controversy, disobedience, and genius. His health has declined in his senior years. To make matters worse, he had type 2 diabetes and weighed more than 300 pounds. Few people were aware that he had idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which was listed as the official cause of death on his death certificate. Brando had grown increasingly reclusive over time. He used to be larger than life, but nowadays he lives in almost complete seclusion. He stayed out of the spotlight, preferring to think back on his history. His body was fading, but his intellect remained bright. When he could, he focused on artistic endeavors. He even recorded voiceovers for an unfinished animated movie. As he would have desired, his funeral was private. He departed quietly and without fanfare after decades in the spotlight. Brando's voice persisted even after he passed away. Marlon provided a personal glimpse inside his mind in the documentary Listen to Me. The whole movie, which was directed by Stephen Riley, was composed of Brando's own recordings, which amounted to hundreds of hours of audio tapes that he had created for himself. These recordings showed a man who was introspective, troubled, and incredibly multifaceted. He talked about his early years, his battles with celebrity, and his tense relationship with his father. His opinions on performing were equally unvarnished. Using the lessons of Stanislavski and Stella Adler, he had transformed the art of method acting. In private, however, he questioned the concept of film itself. He called the idea of art in Hollywood ridiculous and rejected the idea of a great film on the tapes. Although he had little tolerance for the industry that surrounds it, he regarded acting as a means of comprehending human nature. Another aspect of Brando, the activist, was also examined in the documentary. Acting had never been his only passion. He fought for change by using his position. He famously declined his Oscar for The Godfather in 1973, substituting Native American activists such as Little Feather to voice his disapproval of the way Hollywood depicted Native Americans. His recordings revealed a guy who aspired to something more than notoriety. Justice was what he desired. He desired a shift. On a little island in the South Pacific, far from Hollywood, there was yet more to Brando's narrative. He found Tetiaroa, a remote paradise in French Polynesia, in 1960 while filming Mutiny on the Bounty. Its beauty and the local way of life enthralled him. He purchased the island in 1967 with more than simply a getaway in mind. It was a vision. He desired to preserve it, to make something enduring, unaffected by the outer world. There was more to Tetiaroa than simply another tropical island. It was abundant in marine turtles, seabirds, fauna, and kilometers of coral reefs. Brando ensured that it remained that way. He tried to protect its delicate ecology. History was in the place itself. The narrative of an ancient Polynesian culture that flourished on the island long before outsiders came was revealed by archaeological sites strewn over it. Brando kept things straightforward. On one of the atoll's islets, Motu Wantahi, he established a tiny town in 1970. He made use of only indigenous resources, such as thatched roofs and coconut wood, nothing that would upset the ecological equilibrium. The town had an airport, a dining hall, and residences. But no needless extravagance. For him, his family, and environmental researchers, it turned into a private haven. Tetiaroa had secrets, too. The Bermudan yacht Condor ran aground on its reef in 1980, leaving behind debris that persisted for many years. At one point, Brando intended to use some of the ship's components for another project. However, it never materialized, much like a lot of his ideas. Tetiaroa was unaffected by Brando's passing in 2004. No visitors, no tourists. Then a fresh chapter started in 2014. The Brando Resort was created when Pacific Beachcomber SC was given development rights. However, this was no ordinary upscale retreat. Brando's idea was taken into consideration when designing it. The resort had 35 private villas, French and Polynesian dining options, and a spa tucked away in the island's natural setting. However, its dedication to the environment was the most crucial aspect. In order to save sea turtle breeding sites, no overwater buildings were permitted. Private aircraft were the only ones allowed access in order to protect the reef. The resort reduced its carbon impact by using solar energy and coconut biofuel. Waste was also handled with care to prevent damage to the ground. Tetiaroa continues to confront difficulties. Its fragile ecology is under threat from climate change, and efforts to protect it are still underway. However, the island continues to represent Brando's values. He had lived his whole life defying expectations and refusing to let Hollywood, critics, or even his own history define him. Ultimately, his biggest contribution went beyond the screen. It was evident in his lifestyle, the causes he championed, and the legacy he left behind. Unaffected by time, the island holds the dream of a man who never ceased to wonder about the world.